Father God, I thank you for giving us this opportunity to come and worship you on the day that you have set apart for us. Thank you for this wonderful gift of the Sabbath, Lord. Father, when we think of your great love, we don't have words to describe it. We don't have words to thank you enough for your great love. So, Father, this morning as we spend some time thinking about how you have loved us, I ask that you speak to each heart that is here, Lord. May the lessons that you have for us become part of our life so that we will enjoy an enhanced and wonderful relationship with you. Bless us in 2020, Lord, in what we're going to do. We ask in Jesus' name, amen. Every good story has a protagonist and an antagonist. Now, a protagonist is the leading character or one of the major characters in a story, drama, movie, novel, or other fictional work. The antagonist is a person who actively opposes or is hostile to someone or something. An antagonist is usually the person who rivals the chief character and establishes the problem or conflict. In this conflict between the protagonist and the antagonist, we find that this conflict creates human interest that captivates our imagination and holds our interest in stories. All stories have a powerful hold on us. It does not matter if the story is the story of Cinderella, Romeo and Juliet, Star Wars, Westerns, or Bible stories. All these have the capacity to attract and hold our attention. In some ways, it is the conflict between good and evil that started with the fall and continues today. A reading of the Gospels reveals much about the life of Jesus when he was here on the earth. One thing that stands out about him was that he was a master storyteller, the greatest storyteller that ever lived. His most famous story, parable, I'm using parable and story interchangeably, commonly known as the Prodigal Son, but I would like to call this story the story about the two lost sons, is what we are going to use for our study today. Charles Dickens called the story about the two lost sons the greatest short story that was ever written. Coming from Dickens, who knew a thing or two about writing captivating stories, this is a great compliment. Let us begin by reviewing the setting of this story. It is now sometime between late autumn AD 30 and late spring AD 31. It is about 2 months before the crucifixion. The Gospels record that by this time, the focus and demeanor of Jesus has changed. He knew the clock was ticking before his great sacrifice, and his tone and message got more focused. Some of the Gospel writers use the word steadfast to describe how Jesus acted. He was on a mission, and nobody or nothing was going to deter him from accomplishing his mission. This parable and the other two found in Luke 15 were all given by Jesus at the same time, somewhere in the pastures of Perea. By now, Jesus has become very well known in the area of his ministry. Wherever he went, he attracted a large crowd. Luke begins chapter 15 by identifying the groups of people that usually came to hear Jesus, and on this particular occasion came to hear Jesus. He lists the publicans, sinners, Pharisees, and scribes as being in attendance at this time. The first two groups enjoyed listening to Jesus, the publicans and the sinners. They felt good in his company, and they liked the messages that Jesus shared. The last two groups, the scribes and the Pharisees, went to listen to Jesus for ulterior motives. They wanted to catch Jesus into saying something that they could use to accuse him of blasphemy and ultimately try him and get rid of Jesus. We shouldn't be too hard on these scribes and Pharisees, however, because Ellen White in Christ's Object Lesson, page 192, says that some of the very critics who heard Jesus on this occasion later accepted Jesus as the Messiah. The story of the lost two sons is a story in two parts. The first part is the younger son, and the second part is the older brother. In the story, the younger brother represents the publicans and the sinners, and the older brother represents the scribes and Pharisees. Part 1 begins with an unheard request from the younger son. "Give me my share of the estate," is what he says. You can hear the crowd gasp when Jesus mentions this. According to the custom of the day, the oldest male child got a double portion of what other children received as an inheritance. The reason the oldest male child received a double portion was because the extra money was compensation for the oldest son who would manage the estate after the father died, and who would also take care of the aged parents while they were still alive. So in this particular case, the story of the lost two brothers, the older brother got 2/3 and the younger brother got 1/3. Normally, this division took place after the father's death. The younger son's request was tantamount to saying to his father, "I wish you were dead." In a culture where elders were respected and parents were held in high esteem, this was deeply disrespectful and highly hurtful to the father. Most fathers during this time, if confronted with the same respect, would have disowned the son on the spot and sent him from the family with nothing more than a few well-chosen blows to teach the scoundrel a lesson. The father does nothing of this sort. Hearing his son's request, his response is even more shocking than the son's request. He agrees to give his son what he has asked. The crowd cannot believe what they are hearing, but none makes a sound lest they miss some detail as the story continues. The father is willing to suffer ridicule, loss of honor, as well as pain of rejected love. Despite all of this, the father suffers in silence but maintains his love for his son. The crowd notes that there is nothing the son can do that will make the father love him any less. In that respect, the father is reflecting God's love to each one of us. The fate of the younger son is well known to all of us because we have heard the story previously. The son takes his wealth, he lives it up. He forgets his upbringing and disregards God's laws, lest they keep him from having a good time. The money soon runs out, And top of that, there is a famine in the land. All too soon, his fair weather friends leave him, and he finds himself alone and bereft of any company. What is he to do? He never imagined this scenario. Hunger turns him to seek employment, but all he can find by way of a job is to feed pigs, which is deeply insulting to him, a Jew. When he covets what the pigs are eating, he realizes that he has hit rock bottom. He comes to his senses. Crazy, he says to himself, here I am trying to eat what I'm feeding to the pigs when the servants in my father's house have a feast every day compared to what I have. He decides to return home, and perhaps his father will agree to take him back as a servant. One thing is clear in his mind: I can never go back as a son. He's sure of that. But maybe my father will be willing to take him as a servant. But then he remembers the servants live on the father's estate. There's no way he could live on the father's estate after what has happened. So no, he cannot be a servant. So he says, that plan is not going to work. I need to come up with something else. Then he remembers on his father's estate, his father hires tradesmen. These tradesmen lived in the local community, and they would come every day and perform their trade, and they would get a daily wage. So he says, that's it. That way I will not be on the estate, I'll be in the community, I'll get a daily wage. And with this money, I can begin to pay my father back what I have squandered away. So he decides on plan B to ask his father to take him back as a tradesman. His father, the way the son reasons, he can, get money and pay back his father, because in that community, the rabbis had taught people that when you commit a wrong and deprive somebody of an asset, not only were you required to ask for forgiveness, you were also required to make restitution. So he hopes by getting a job, he can begin to pay his father back and slowly mend his relationship with his father. On the long journey home, the son rehearses what it is he is going to say to his father. He runs this speech over and over again in his mind. He runs the various scenes about what is going to happen when he meets his father. He imagines all the different possibilities of an outcome. But in all of the scenes he imagines, not once does he even come close to what actually happens in reality. The last scene of part 1 deserves some elaboration. Luke 15:20 puts it this way. So he got up and went to his father, but while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. Now, several things are striking in Luke's account about this reunion. First of all, if I was the father and I saw my son after what had happened, I would be filled with something all right, but I don't think it would be compassion. Secondly, the father runs to meet his son. Note that Luke tells us that the father ran towards his son, but there is no mention of the son running towards the father. Here is why this is so extraordinary. As owner of a large estate, the normal dress that an owner of a large estate wore was a robe. The robe reaches down to the feet. A robe restricts movement of legs, which is needed to run. The only way he could have run is if he lifted his robe, bared his legs, and ran. Can you imagine what the headline in the local newspaper would have been the next day? Local owner bares legs to run to meet his lost son. This is also extraordinary because in that culture, boys ran, young people ran, women ran, but owners of large estates did not run. Does the father care? No. He is just as thrilled that his son is back. The third thing that is striking is that the father is welcoming his son, and the son is unable to respond in the same manner that the father is welcoming him. There is a reason why the son seems to be frozen like a statue. The reason is he's just flabbergasted. He's speechless. This was not an outcome he anticipated. He doesn't know how to respond because he never imagined this in his mind. The father does not give him a chance to complete the speech that he has practiced 1,000 times. The father orders robes for his son and orders that the fatted calf be killed for a feast. So ends part 1 with a huge banquet and dancing. This is a picture of the prodigal God. The title of my sermon is taken from the title of Timothy Keller's book of the same name, The Prodigal God. Now, prodigal means recklessly extravagant or having spent everything, and that is what God did. God, in giving us the gift of Jesus, spent everything that there was to spend, and after he gave us Jesus, there was nothing left to spend. That is the meaning of prodigal. Now, the prodigal son, because of what he did, takes on a negative tone, but the word itself doesn't imply that. And that is why he is the prodigal God. Now, if Jesus ended his story at this point, it still would have been a great story that demonstrates God's great love for sinners. But no, there is part 2, and that to me is the real story, the story about the elder brother. Part 2 of the story deals with the older brother who represents scribes and Pharisees. Early in Luke 15, we note that the scribes and Pharisees murmured because Jesus welcomed publicans and sinners. This man receiveth sinners, they complained. In their view, only they, as religious leaders, were entitled to meet with Jesus because they felt they were entitled to this because they kept the law and followed the precepts that were laid out in the scriptures. How dare Jesus show favor to tax collectors and sinners? Jesus had clearly mentioned that his mission in coming to this earth was not to come to the healthy. His mission was to come to those who needed healing. In other words, he was saying, I'm not come to minister to the righteous, but to the sinners who are in need of righteousness. The rest of the story is for the scribes and Pharisees. Now, the older brother was not a witness to his younger brother's reconciliation. I don't think, frankly, he could have handled the welcome had he been a witness to it. Because what he hears, he cannot handle. He was in the fields working as a dutiful son. He hears music and is told by the servants about what is what has happened, and he is furious. It is now his turn to disrespect and insult his father. He refuses to join the party or welcome his brother. The father does not expect this reaction and is taken aback by how he reacts. And he pleads with his son to come and make the restoration complete. The older son refuses the father's invitation. Not only does the older brother refuse to come in, but he turns on his father because the younger brother gets the fatted calf, and despite his faithful service to the father, he did not even get a small goat to celebrate with his friends. The older brother's actions say that because he has the model son, he now deserves to tell his father how wrong he is about what he is doing and how he should restore his younger son to the family according to the father. Now, the oldest boy may have also realized by his father restoring the younger son to his original position, he stands to gain another 1/3 of the estate when the father dies. So he says, listen, this is coming out of mine, so maybe that's adding to his fury. Now, this reaction, or his reaction to the younger brother coming back, misses the whole point that is made in the two other parables that precede this parable in Luke 15. It is the parable about the lost sheep and the parable of the lost coin. In those two stories, there is extreme joy on the part of those, the shepherd and the woman who lost the coin, when they find the coin. So there should be even more happiness when the lost son is found and restored, but we find that is not the case. The older brother was not such a model son after all. God made it clear after what happened between Cain and Abel that we are our brother's keeper. We have an obligation to look out for one another. A true older brother would have seen his father's agony over the lost son, and he would have gone out and tried to find his younger brother and restore his brother to the family. How different was the action of our older brother, Jesus, to each one of us when we were lost. He came to seek and to find and to restore us to the family of God like a true older brother. I'm sure the crowd was eagerly waiting for the conclusion of what happens to the older brother in the story. But Jesus does not provide an ending. He stops the story without an ending. Christ Object Lessons provides a reason why Jesus did not provide an ending to the parable. Christ Object Lesson says this: for the parable was still enacting, and it rested upon his leaders to determine what the outcome should be. The paradox of our church today, and I think this is not limited to our church, I think it's a common problem to all of our churches, that we do not attract the kinds of people that were attracted to Jesus. Let me mention this again. I think the paradox of the church today, and all churches, is that we fail to attract the kinds of people that were attracted to Jesus. Why do you think this is? I think it is because the church today is made up of more older brothers or more scribes and Pharisees than younger brothers or more publicans and sinners. And friends, I am including myself in this. In real life, I am an older brother, and I know what it means to be an older brother. And I think my role in the church fits more with the description of the older brother than the younger brother. And unfortunately, I'm not alone in this. If this is true, then we must see what Jesus' answer is to the problems of the scribes and Pharisees. In no uncertain terms, our Savior had pointed out the problems that the scribes and Pharisees had. It was their self-righteousness, their focus on works to gain favor, and the hypocrisy that kept them from being restored to the family of God. They felt they had no need of the blessings of Jesus. Is that the reason why we are not fully restored to the family of God? I think each of us needs to ask if we still we're holding on to the problems that the scribes and Pharisees of Jesus' time had. And if that is true, then we need to do what Jesus tells us to do. The scribes and Pharisees were sure that their good works would earn them favor in the sight of heaven. And Jesus, time and time again, reserved the strongest condemnation to these people because their self-righteousness was what was going to keep them from the kingdom. One of the reasons that Jesus does not finish the story of the older brother is because he had spoken about that many times before. And the scribes and Pharisees knew about what Jesus had said about how one gets to heaven. Contrast two passages of how Jesus deals with two groups in the context of the judgment. Matthew 7:21 to 23, we read these words which is addressed to this group. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father who is in heaven will enter. Many will say to me on that day, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name cast out demons, and in your name perform many miracles? And then I will declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you who practice lawlessness. Strong condemnation to people who think that they have served the Lord. Now in Matthew 25, we have Christ speaking to another group. And in Matthew 25, 35 to 40, this is what we read. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. Naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me. Then the righteous will answer him, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? And when did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or naked and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and come to you? The king will answer and say to them, truly I say to you, to the extent that you did it to one of these brothers of mine, even the least of them, you did it to me. Both these groups engage in good works, but only one group's works count. What is the difference? In the first group, it appears that they are keeping score of their good works. They remind the judge that they have done this and they have done that, as if to say that the judge has failed to take all of their good works into consideration. In the second group, they are not even aware that they have done these good works and served Jesus. They ask, when did we do these? And Jesus has to remind them that doing it for others, they have done it to him. In other words, doing good had become second nature for the second group. Only when obedience follows as a natural result of love for God and one's fellow men is it of any value in God's sight. Works count, but it is the motivation or the intent behind the work that counts also. How do we change our motives? Here's how. In page 374 of the Testimonies, Volume 4, Ellen White has this wonderful suggestion which all of us, if we have not adopted it, should adopt it in the new year so we can practice it throughout 2020. And here's what it says. It would be well to spend a thoughtful hour each day reviewing the life of Christ from the manger to Calvary. We should take it point by point and let the imagination vividly grasp each scene, especially the closing ones of his earthly life. By thus contemplating his teachings and sufferings, and the infinite sacrifice made by him for the redemption of the race, we may strengthen our faith, quicken our love, and become more deeply imbued with the Spirit which sustained our Savior. If we would be saved, at least we must all learn the lessons of penitence and faith at the foot of the cross. It could not be simpler. 1 hour each day, dwelling on God, the life of Jesus, especially the scenes of his last days, will bring us to a new relationship with God. Once we catch a glimpse of the great love that Jesus has demonstrated in dying to save us, we will be motivated to obey his commandment that we love each other even as he loved us. Works that are motivated by love for what Jesus had done counts for something, not works that are motivated by us because we think there is merit in works. In other words, works motivated by love for Jesus needs to become second nature. How is this done? It is done in the same way that everything else in life has become second nature to us. We become competent at a number of things as we grow up. And somebody has explained this as the 4 stages of competence. And all of us have done it. We may not have realized that we've done it in these 4 stages, but we've done it. And here are the 4 stages. The first stage is unconscious incompetence. Now, I want to use for my example a person who's going to, or a child who learns how to tie their shoelaces. Okay, so from the birth on to adulthood. At first, they're in a level of unconscious incompetence. They don't know that they have to tie their shoelaces, nor can they tie their shoelaces. You see that? They're unconscious of the need. They're unconscious. They're unable, to have the skill. Now, in the second stage, it's conscious incompetence. As they grow older, when the child becomes a toddler, maybe 2 or 3, 4 years, that age, they realize that before you can go out wearing your shoes, you have to tie the shoelaces. But they realize that they can't tie their shoelaces. Okay? Now, the third stage is conscious competence. This is where they know they have to tie their shoelaces, and yes, they can tie their shoelaces because we've used nursery rhymes to tell them that this hand goes over this hand and you tie the bow and you pull the knot and boom, the shoelace is tied and they can go out and do what they have to do. And the last stage is unconscious competence. This is where you don't even think about it and you do it. And you'll see an adult talking to somebody while they tie their shoelaces. They don't look down at the shoelaces. They don't think, oh, I have to do this action or that action. It just comes naturally. All of us are competent in that. If you think of a language, how we learnt a language, we learnt it one word at a time. And language is a complex thing to learn, but we all have learnt it and now speak it without realizing, because we are at that last stage, unconscious competence. Or driving, take driving for example. When I learned to drive, it was a stick shift. I didn't even know that they had cars with automatic transmission. It was a stick shift, and you had to be very conscious of the gear that you were in and how to use the clutch and do all of that, otherwise you wouldn't get very far. But after a while, it just comes naturally. You don't even think about it. You're unconscious of it. The same thing happens if we practice what Jesus has told us: to serve, feed the hungry, to clothe the naked, to visit people who are in prison. That's when we can begin to do these. And the more we do them, we reach the stage of unconscious competence. And that's the stage that Jesus was talking to when they said, Lord, when did we do this? They don't even know they've done it because it's unconscious competence. If each of us made this a priority in 2020, we will see a change in our church that will surprise us. How many of you would like to join me in making this a part of our daily routine this year? If you would, I would like you to make that commitment, and each of us can join in doing what I have suggested as an example. And those are not the only things. There are many other things that we can engage in that will get us to the same place. I would like to close my sermon with a story that Philip Yancey includes in his book, What is So Amazing About Grace? I call it the story of the prodigal daughter. Have you heard the story about the prodigal daughter? Well, we do have a story about the prodigal daughter, just as we have a story about the prodigal son. I apologize, I'm going to read this for you, because if I try to tell it to you, I think I'm going to lose something in the impact of the story, so bear with me as I read it to you. A young girl grows up on a cherry orchard just above Traverse City, Michigan. Her parents, a bit old-fashioned, tend to overreact to her nose ring, the music she listens to, and the length of her skirts. They ground her a few times, and she seethes inside. I hate you, she screams at her father when he knocks on the door of her room after an argument. And that night, she acts on a plan she has mentally rehearsed scores of times. She runs away. She has visited Detroit only once before, on a bus trip with a church youth group to watch the Tigers play. Because newspapers in Traverse City report in lurid detail the gangs, the drugs, and violence in downtown Detroit, she concludes that is probably the last place her parents will look for her. California maybe, or Florida, but not Detroit. Her second day there, she meets a man who drives the biggest car she has ever seen. He offers her a ride, buys her lunch, arranges a place for her to stay. He gives her some pills that makes her feel better than she's ever felt before. She was right all along, she decides. Her parents were keeping her from all the fun. The good life continues for a month, 2 months, a year. The man with the big car, she calls him boss. He teaches her a few things that men like. Since she's underage, men pay a premium for her. She lives in a penthouse and orders room service whenever she wants. Occasionally, she thinks about the folks back home, but their lives now seem so boring that she can hardly believe she grew up there. She has a brief scare when she sees her picture printed on the back of a milk carton with the headline, "Have you seen this child?" But by now she has blonde hair, and with all the makeup and body-piercing jewelry she wears, nobody will mistake her for a child. Besides, most of her friends are runaway, and nobody squeals in Detroit. After a year, the first sallow signs of illness appear, and it amazes her how fast the boss turns mean. "These days we can't mess around," he growls, and before she knows it, she's out on the street without a penny to her name. She still turns a couple of tricks a night, but they don't pay much, and all the money goes to support her drug habit. When winter blows in, she finds herself sleeping on metal grates outside big department stores. Sleeping is the wrong word. A young teenage girl at night in downtown Detroit can never relax her guard. Black bands circle her eyes and her cough worsens. One night as she lies awake listening for footsteps, all of a sudden, everything about her life looks different. She no longer feels like a woman of the world. She feels like a little girl lost in a cold and frightening city. She begins to whimper. Her pockets are empty. She's hungry. She needs a fix. She pulls her legs tight underneath her and shivers under the newspapers she's piled atop her coat. Something jolts a synapse of memory, and a single image fills her mind of May in Traverse City, when a million cherry trees bloom at once, with her golden retriever dashing through the rows and rows of blossomy trees, chasing a tennis ball. "God, why did I leave?" she says to herself, and pain stabs at her heart. "My dog back home eats better than I do now." She's sobbing, and she knows in a flash that more than anything else in the world, she wants to go home. 3 straight phone calls, 3 straight connections with the answering machine. She hangs up without leaving a message the first 2 times. But the third time she says, "Dad, Mom, it's me. I was wondering about maybe coming home. I'm catching a bus up your way, and I'll get there about midnight tomorrow. If you're not there, well, I guess I'll just stay on the bus until it hits Canada." It takes about 7 hours for the bus trip to make the stops between Detroit, Traverse City. And during that time, she realizes the flaws in her plan. What if her parents are out of town and miss the message? Shouldn't she have waited another day so she could talk to them in person? Even if they are home, they probably wrote her off as dead long ago. She should have given them some time to overcome the shock. Her thoughts bounce back and forth between these worries and the speech she is preparing for her father. "Dad, I'm sorry. I know I was wrong. It's not your fault. It's all mine. Dad, can you forgive me?" She says these words over and over, her throat tightening even as she rehearses them. She hasn't apologized to anyone in years. The bus has been driving with lights on since Bay City. Tiny snowflakes hit the road, and the asphalt steams. She's forgotten how dark it gets out here. A deer darts across the road, and the bus swerves. Every so often, a billboard, a sign posting the mileage to Traverse City. Oh God. When the bus finally rolls into the station, its air brakes hissing in protest, the driver announces in a crackly voice over the microphone, 15 minutes, folks, that's all we have here. 15 minutes to decide her life. She checks herself in the compact mirror, smooths her hair, and licks the lipstick off her teeth. She looks at the tobacco stains on her fingerprints and wonders if her parents will notice, if they are there. She walks into the terminal not knowing what to expect, and not one of the 1,000 scenes that have played out in her mind prepare her for what she sees. There in the concrete wall and plastic chairs bus terminal in Traverse City, Michigan, stands a group of 40 family members, brothers and sisters, great aunts and uncles, and cousins, and a grandmother and a great-grandmother to boot. They are all wearing ridiculously looking party hats and blowing noisemakers, and taped across the entire wall of the terminal is a huge computer-generated banner that reads, "Welcome Home." Out of the crowd of well-wishers breaks her dad. She looks through tears and begins the memorized speech. "Dad, I'm sorry, I know." He interrupts her. "Hush, child, we've got no time for that. No time for apologies. You'll be late for the party. A banquet is waiting for you at home." We too have a banquet waiting for us in heaven. And Jesus is the key to get there.
My name is Pastor Michael Oxentenko, and we're just so happy that you're checking into our sermon content at Reaching Hearts SDA Church on YouTube. I want to really encourage you to hit the subscribe button. And if you want more of our preaching, teaching, just go to the playlist and you'll see it laid out there. Again, thank you so much for being a part of our gospel preaching, teaching ministry.